things in there. So welcome. This is going to be the last committee meeting for the year. And actually, I'd like to thank everybody that's been through this year. I think we actually have made progress. And I'm hoping that in the following year, we'll make even more progress as well. So thank you, everybody. And with that little bit of an introduction, we will begin. And I'm going to ask Councillor Smith to give an opening karakia, and then we'll start.
Kia ora, Mr. Chair. E noi tātou. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Ke mā kina ki uta, ke mā taratara ki tau. E hi aki ana te atakura, e kio hi hoka, ke hauhu ti hei maurora.
Thank you, Councillor. Also, we have another councillor, Councillor Clendon, who's going to present. So I'm going to move that he has speaking rights.
We've got a second.
From Councillor Smith. Is everybody in favour of that? All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. How we do the other stuff. Yep. So thank you. Thanks, Dave, for being here. We have some apologies. We got apologies from, before we put a piece of paper from the Deputy Mayor, the Mayor, and Councillor Tipper. Any other apologies? I think that everybody else has here. Neither? Right. I'll move to accept those apologies. Do I have a seconder? Thanks, Bruce. All in favour? Aye. And declarations, anybody have a declaration of interest they wish to raise at this stage? If not, as it arises, you can raise any declarations of interest. Thank you. No deputations? Thank you. And so we move now to page 12, which is item 4.1, and we've got the declaration of the previous minutes. Do I have a move in a second? Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Councillor. So, any corrections? Actually, there are two sets of minutes, isn't there? One second. Any corrections? No. Okay, I'll put to the vote. All in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So now we move on to item 5.1. Have a move in the second. Councillor Smith and Councillor Stratford. Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move that we suspend standing orders for the moment, because this is going to attract a number of comments, and they give you some time there, Councillor Clendon, and but I'll be handing over to Will and start to give Tanya to give a comment first. But so, do I have a seconder to suspend standing orders? Thanks, Councillor Smith. All in favour? Aye. Carried. So it was suspended standing orders.
Sorry, all of them?
No, just for this. All of them, yeah. For this.
All the standing orders.
No, not all of them, but just so that we can actually speak for a longer period of time.
Which one?
Which ones?
I don't know. Just a clarification.
The ones that are applicable. I'll be.
Which standing order do you want to bring?
King of process. Great, thanks, Mike. So, well,
thank you very much, Chair. The Chair and I and Tanya had a discussion this morning, and I think it's a great idea of the Chairs to hold this in almost a semi-workshop fashion, albeit that we're in committee, because this is one of the most all-embracing of topics, not just for the far north, but obviously for the nation. I would just focus on one thing, though, that we are here to discuss risk. We're not here to discuss climate change in the round, and so we need to, I think, keep us a laser-like focus on that issue. Tanya, would you mind leading us off for a couple of minutes on this one to outline your report? I think I don't want Tanya to look over the big headline, but during the workshop yesterday, when Tanya was out of the room, Bruce, and he's a hard taskmaster, I have to tell you. Bruce lavished praise on the work that Tanya's done in the risk space, and that's particularly true when it comes to climate change. And I think we've got some independent evidence which Tanya will unpack, showing the progress that we've made. Tanya.
Thank you. What I'd like to speak to about the report is, it is a decision report. There are a number of different decisions you can take. Obviously, ideally, we're thinking that all of those recommendations will be picked up. But what we did following the March meeting this year, when we did the deep dive on climate change, and it became very clear that there was an appetite to unpack the things around climate change, I completed some strategic analysis of climate change, and we came up with 4 key things, and those are the 4 things that are presented in the report around those 4 risks. Since the March meeting, we've also brought together a climate change risk reference group, and that is a group of very capable individuals that cuts through our organisation. And the report that I did on the strategic analysis went to the climate change risk reference group, and we workshopped our risk position. When we'd finished with the workshopping of that risk position, wrote another discussion paper back to the GMSPP just to make sure we're moving in the correct direction, and got approval to move forward for a decision report here. I think it was early November or late October we brought on board, sorry, I'm going to have to refer to my notes, the beginning of November, a consultancy called Te Whakahari, which I may have mispronounced, so I apologise for that. And our risk position was provided back to them for them to have a look at and to consider where we have landed. They helped us rephrase a couple of the risks a little bit. We had an opportunity statement, which is interesting after our earlier conversation about opportunities. And they said that their experience has been that it lands better written as a risk statement. So the 4th of those things is about the opportunity that sits in there for climate change. So I've called out that it's an opportunity, but the consultants recommended rewriting that as a risk statement, which fits better with our framework at the moment, because we actually don't have a way of assessing opportunities. And I can flip it around in my head quite easily, but not everyone can do that. What we also came back with is that they've said that our thinking puts us in the upper 10% of Australian councils, and that there are currently about 30 Australian councils that are wanting to bring it together like we have with those 4 things. They've also said that our risk management practice will take us leading edge of the norm and will really support the development of the climate change policy. So they were really comfortable with where we've landed and very supportive of that positioning. So that was just to give you some confidence that we haven't gone down a road.
Rabbit hole, so to speak.
Yes, well, because the 4 things are quite different, and you'll see in the introduction to the report, I've been able to use from the AOG report that just came out in October, where other councils within New Zealand are sitting, and a lot of them, as the report states, have not identified climate change as a separate risk. So this is stepping out from that again with the 4 things.
Thank you, Tanya. That's great. It's actually quite encouraging to hear what the consultants told us. I'm also personally very encouraged to see it broken out. You've probably heard me say a few times that just saying climate change is not enough. But by breaking out like this, it gives us focus on what to deal with and put the risk around it and the mitigations that go with it. So I'm quite encouraged by all of that. I'm going to now, before we go to our members, hand over to Councillor Clendon, who in your portfolio have been all over this, I guess, the aspects of it. So do you wish to make comments?
Well, thank you, John. Only very briefly to say here that when this first came up, initially I wondered why. Clearly it was to some extent driven by this committee's observations. And when you do look at the way the original framing of the risk is, it's an awful lot to pack into one section. Everything from financial, public risk, physical risk, infrastructure, to life and well-being, etc. It's such a great big grab bag of issues that it's obvious really when you think about it now with the benefit of hindsight. It makes perfect sense to break it up into something, because by doing that, you make it much more accessible to management, I think, to managing the risk, understanding it better, explaining it better. I'll just say the one thing that I did have to think hard about, and Tanya mentioned it, was the notion of treating opportunity as risk. It's really acknowledging the risk that we miss the opportunities, which is a somewhat roundabout, circular way, but I'll be guided by the experts. Te Whakahaere, the company, I think, they've done work for and with us earlier under another name, and they do have a great deal of experience both in public and private sector here and in Australia. And I have to say that the advice they've given us to date and some of their framing and ideas and modelling do stand up to inspection. They seem pretty robust. There aren't that many people actually with that level of experience and insight, particularly into local government, because local government, as we know, is a rare, wonderful beast. It's not like other sectors. We have different drivers, different responsibilities and all of that. So as I say, I have a level of confidence in what they're giving us. And with that, the exception of having to think hard about the risk of missing an opportunity, I don't think it just makes sense to divide it, to slice and dice a little bit. Often it's somewhat perverse in a way. Usually you think if you can make one clear, bold statement, that will give you a better focus, a better operational base. But in this instance, it's just too complicated, I think, to try and stuff it all into one sack. And so I think we're probably no better. And so having made this step, I look forward to rapid implementation of all sorts of wonderful projects in-house and in the community to start mitigating and adapting, because that's what we need to do.
Yep.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Clinton. So now I'll open up the committee. So we've got Councillor Smith. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll keep it brief. And firstly, I just want to start by thanking Tanya. Tanya, your reports are always such a pleasure to read. I always find them so easy to digest, and I have to admit that as I went through it, the questions that I had in my mind, you answered every single one of them. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you for that. I'm really happy with this recommendation. There was a little bit of diving into what each of the 1, 2, 3, 4s meant, but once I understood that, it just made really good sense. Now, like Councillor Clendon, I'm just excited to see it in practice. My question that I do have, though, is off the back of something that we talked about yesterday. Actually, firstly, sorry, can I just also point out how much I appreciated the responsibilities section, and I want to support the reporting frequency recommendations that sit alongside each of those 4 as well. But my question comes back to something that Bruce had raised yesterday, and Will and I have had a conversation around this now, and I've had a couple of conversations leading into it, but around how we incorporate risk management into our decision-making framework. And I think that I'd like to take the opportunity to highlight that it would be great to take the same approach from a strategic delivery point of view as well. So what do we do with our risk dashboard to ensure that it's influencing right throughout the organisation, and then bring that back to a governance level to really help with our decision making? I don't see that we need to put any kind of resolution in place, because I'm happy with the conversation I have with Will, but just flagging that ultimately we will see in this triennium a decision making framework that's perhaps alongside our compliance schedule that shows how strategic delivery is being achieved with the decisions we're making, as well as risk management. And being that this is my favourite risk of all time, I thought I'd take the opportunity to bring it up with this one. So thank you, and thank you, Tanya.
Sure. Any other comments? I might add that while someone is waiting to put their hand up, I missed it, but I'll just add now that I've started. There is attached to this risk, climate change risk, there is the Parliament District Council Climate Change Roadmap, and also there is the climate change goals. Now, risk obviously will be measuring our achievement towards those goals, but that's there for completion as well, and it's worth reading those in the context. This is a risk workshop. I'm not a risk, this is a risk committee, So we're focusing on the aspect of the risk associated with that and the goals that we may be missing out on in monitoring. Councillor
Stratford. Thank you. Chair Usage.
Oh, then Member Bruce.
Thank you. Thanks, Tanya, for a great report, and yeah, I concur. The report was awesome. I also would like to acknowledge Don in the room, who's also our support with the Joint Committee Climate Change Adaptation Strategy. I recognise the risks identified in here align across the adaptation strategy and the climate change roadmap. I can see, the external issues reflected in the change organisation and the change community transition risks, and in the failure to understand and capture climate related opportunities. I can see the leading, the siloed and deferred, approach that appears to be happening across all councils, and deferrals of, approach to infrastructure upgrades in the organisation transition risk and the direct risk to council physical and natural assets. The relationships I can see in the community transition risk, and yeah, I just want to plug that, we've got many opportunities to build and foster relationships so that when we have to engage with community on this big take, it doesn't, it doesn't cause a fright for them, because some communities will have to move, and that speaks to the what's it called, the the transition parts of those risks. But one thing that Councillor Smith raised, and my question is similar, but I'm asking it in a different way. Have the treatments that have been applied to these risks, what confidence do you have that the treatments that will be applied will ensure implementation across planning and infrastructure programs in our council?
Is that one, Jamie, that you or Tanya can pick up?
Thank you, Mr. Stratford. It's a really good question, because that's the gap, and that's why in the report I've shown all the treatments that have so far been identified, but there is a significant piece of work that needs to go in there to align the treatments to those risks and to work out that roadmap. So that needs to happen. And the risk progress report should clarify where we get to on that.
Okay, and further to that, one of the reasons that I had really pushed in the past for natural disasters, that's what it was, previously, to be top of our risk matrix, is because we had so many of them here. Before I experienced drought as a councillor, it was storm events, roofs getting blown off houses, and cyclones, and how major it is for this organisation when things like that happen. How many slips did we have in the last storm that we're still trying to fix up? How many spill overflows into stormwater? That all of that is a massive risk, and that's why I really put it as such a high priority. What comfort do you have that these are moving further down the list? 15, 16, 17, 18, now it's split up, the risk has been spread.
So there are several aspects to that question.
Yeah.
One is that we did have on our organisational dashboard a risk around civil defence. So that risk has been mitigated and has now come off the dashboard. And so that's about responding to those disasters. The risk around assets is also, the climate change risk around assets is where a number of those issues that you have raised should be hit.
And number 17.
Yeah. The number 17 improvements.
Climate change, direct risk to council, physical and natural assets. Yeah, cool. So it's still in the top 20. It's not number 1 anymore. That's all.
May I address that point?
Yep.
Thank you.
You got a comment?
The risks are numbered, and when a risk has been retired, I haven't reused the number, and I don't renumber them, so there's clarity around the ID. So those numbers, originally when you first did this in 2019, they were in descending order.
Yeah.
But now they're not, because I keep renumbering them, and I was concerned that would lead to confusion around which risk we were talking about.
Okay, cool. Thank you for that. Awesome.
Councillor? Bruce? We're going to go Bruce and then we go to Councillor Clendon. And did you have your hand up? Member Mike?
Roger Ackers, staff online, has his hand up as well. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, then we'll go to Will and then Roger.
Thanks, John. Look, I want to ask another question. The 2020 roadmap, this was news to me. Probably shouldn't have been news to me. And I don't know whether it was or not, because I presume that's informed the risk task group in the way that you're actually doing it. Can I ask a question? At the bottom of it, there is quite a prescribed set of actions and costs. Have they been added into our LTP, etc.? So we're doing those.
That was one of my questions.
Pardon? Yeah, so you've got them there now. I think it's the back end page
48.
43 onwards of our agenda pages. Have they been built into? So this is a live roadmap.
That was my question.
Yep.
Is that correct? Everybody's nodding their heads, so I don't know who should answer that question, but it sounds like the answer is yes. Great, good, thank you. That's my question.
Yeah, thanks. I have a question on that too, but I'll wait till last. Not so much a question. Councillor?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just partly responding to Kelly's question, partly being opportunistic, because to get on the horse that this whole project will live or die on how well it embeds into the culture of the organisation. If you want to get an overarching strategic outcome like sustainability or managing climate change, it has to be in the DNA of the organisation, and that will take time. You know, it doesn't happen quickly. In part, I guess that is Donald's task. Well, bless him, because it won't be an easy thing to do. Of course, Donald has only, just to acknowledge, Donald's only recently come full-time into this role. He was doing it part-time and managing bylaws, and since he is able to devote his days to it, we have seen a lot of progress, actually. It's been really encouraging. But I just make the point that this has to be, that's got to be part of the organisational culture, recognition that this has to succeed, both for the well-being of the organisation, but more critically for the district and everybody in it. So as I say, that's fundamental to achieving the overall outcome, is that buy-in from everybody who's part of this organisation, from governance, management, through to the people who pick up the waste, and they're probably the most important people, actually. So, yes, that's all.
Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Clinton. And I'll go to Will and then Roger.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just put together something that Councillor Clendon said with what Councillor Smith said earlier. Councillor Clendon used the phrase strategic outcome, and that's what I think Councillor Smith was saying to me in a conversation just before this meeting. The point that Councillor Smith was saying, and as always, she points you in the right direction. She gives you a bit of an answer as well as the question. In our compliance schedule, we've got many tools that we can use to get strategic outcomes, and this is one small one. But important, Councillor Smith suggests that perhaps the compliance schedule could be redrafted, and she pointed me in the direction of Dunedin City Council, and they've got two sections in there. One is, how does the report fit within the strategic framework? Does it tick the climate change box, or indeed, does it detract from it if we take any action? And there's another separate section on risk, so that's something I can assure Councillor Smith and the committee that we'll look at revamping.
Thank you.
Yep. So, Roger?
Yes.
That
Afternoon, through the chair. So to give some support here from Strategic Planning and Policy for what's going on here. This is a small step, but quite a significant step for us down the path, joining up the climate change that needs to happen in the organisation. So by doing this work here and breaking out these risks and making the reporting timeframes every 3 months means that we have a place to be held to account for the work we're going to be doing around changes we put into the council. So I'm just giving my support to the work that's going on here through the work Tanya's on here to give effect to the roadmap that was adopted back in 2020.
Thanks, Roger. I don't think there's any other questions. Great. So just one comment to the members. This is relative. These are new changes. It's a big area. I did say I was going to comment on the costs and the long-term plan. And if you look at the nature of the problem and the figures here, I do wonder how, is it reflective of what we actually have to do in terms of overall cost. Now, I know it's a long-term plan. You're looking at 3 years out before we do another one or redraft. But I'm also aware of the government's changes to the Act and everything else that goes with it.
Councillor Besich, can I perhaps just expand on that, because I think that raises a really good question.
Yeah.
Through Will, maybe for Darren, just some really good clarity on when that roadmap will be reviewed. I think is probably.
So Darren, can you make a note of that, please? So why I raised that is that I'm wondering if, and it's a question to the members, if we do need, because we're going to be programming the coming work in the following year, whether we do need more work. Obviously there'll be more work done in this area and the other committees, but I'm just asking in this committee if you do need more work in terms of the nature of the risk and diving a bit deeper into this one. Any appetite to schedule a workshop or not on it?
I haven't turned my mind to that, to be honest.
All right, have a think about it and get and through Will, I'd say, drop me an email as well. Follow that up because it might be something that might be requested should there be further detail required. But otherwise, it's a great report. And so what I'll do now is re-establish the orders. Thank you. And all in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. So, and I'm going to put this now to the vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you very much. So now we'll move on to item 6.1, which is the risk management report.
Have you
And
moved?
and that's okay, 51. Sorry.
That was Rachel moving.
Oh yeah, move. Thanks. Thanks, Rachel. Do I have a seconder?
Yep.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. Now, I'll open it up to Tanya. Do you want to actually make a comment on anything there that we take as being read? If there's anything there that you want to highlight for us, if not, that's great. And what I would like to do is go through each one of those individually. So there's a bit of the report, and then we go through, say, the delivery of the services risk, which is R005 on page, and just seek comments from each one so that we're not jumping all over the place. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tanya, before we go through it?
Thank you. I think the report is quite self-explanatory. I'm happy to take questions. I don't think there's anything that I need to specifically call to your attention.
Okay. Any thoughts? Thanks. Councillor Stratford.
If I'm in the right part of the agenda, yes, I am. So, yep, great report. I like these, getting a little bit down so we understand that what we say is going to happen to the risk is actually happening or progressing. And I just wanted to say around abatements, when there's some, I get to have a bit of a look at those at my Three Waters portfolio. So yeah, get a slight look under the put there, so I've got that extra governance comfort. And customer services delivery, I think that our council's moving really quickly to having good accessible information online. So, which, you know, the report speaks to, the next one speaks to about data governance as well. So as well as having, meeting customer services delivery needs, you know, being able to lodge RFSs or get digital things online, there should be more positive customer services delivery and less legoimas around, you know, that protection of information. And on the water resilience, although there isn't a impending drought, we do still have some water sources that have issues and could potentially have a water shortage notice on them come January. So I have urged comms to have, you know, put some notices out around conservation. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stratford. You didn't quite listen to what I said. So what I was going to do is go through each one.
Talking to
all of them at once. So
that's
back.
Yeah.
I'll give you another opportunity if you want to add anything else. So we'll start on page 60, which is the delivery of services.
Nice.
Does anybody want to comment on that one? And Councillor Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my comment would be we are seeing this risk continuously sitting in the red and continuously trending upwards. And I think the first point I want to make is I don't ever have entire clarity as to how we define affordability. Sometimes I feel that it's the impact the organisation has on affordability within our lane, and sometimes I feel like the report is written from a big picture contextual point of view. So I'd be keen to get some more clarity around that. But my question in all of that is the treatment that we're applying in this sufficient to addressing the risk and where we want to be? Is there more that we can be doing in this space? I note that we did a report a year ago and we're looking to do another report. Is the treatment, is that enough? And is there anything that can be done from a governance point of view to support changing that traffic light from a red traffic light naturally makes me uncomfortable, and I'd be keen to see that starting to shift. So that's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I might ask for a bit of assistance from Janice here as well, if I don't cover the ground enough. I think even New Zealand's top economist, Brad Olson, I don't think he could tell us what's round the corner. None of us really know, but it's something that exercises Janice's mind and I with this issue of affordability. One of the reasons why we put together the comprehensive package that we did around reprioritisation and the methodology Janice used in the recent workshop is it was a bit of a test bed for what I think could be a more trying set of circumstances this time next year, because people are having it tough out there, they genuinely are, and they may be having it tougher in the future. So I think we need to provide a system of budgeting that we can cut our cloth as need be. So that for me is one of the key risks that I think we face here.
I would agree.
Mr. Chair, perhaps if I could just respond?
Yep.
That would be great. I think that this is a really good opportunity. We've discussed in the past about what the role of this committee is in terms of a response. And I guess my question is whether there are strategic outputs that we need to be looking at. I've noticed that often when we talk about addressing affordability, it's simply to cut our costs. We're not talking about the other way around and how we can think more outside the box. So I recognise that that's not necessarily a question for now, but I think there is a very good opportunity here for this committee to look at how we might suggest addressing that, be that through our financial strategies going forward. Thank you.
I can add to that. Just as an example, we know that inflation is increasing, interest rates are increasing, material costs are increasing, and therefore if there's a project we know is coming up, one way is to, which does raise the issue of risk, and therefore on this table, what is our appetite for risk? We could, for example, buy the material ready for a project we know that's going to happen, and therefore reduce our costs. But any other questions on this item?
I think Janice was looking to.
Janice? Yeah.
Through the chair, I would talk to Tanya about this. I would like to see this risk actually broken down the same way as we've just done the climate change one. because it is big and there's a lot of moving parts in it, and I think we get confused about what we're talking about, and I think that's clear from the comments that have been made today. So I would actually like to break it down into smaller chunks of risk if we can.
Okay, and that's a good point. So if we leave that with Janice, if we leave it with Will and the team. Any other, Bruce?
I must confess, I'm trying to think about if I understand actually what are the mitigations. So we go back to your point, Rachel. What are the mitigations that we're doing with this? Because I look at this from the supply side. This risk starts by saying we have a small breaking base. So the natural thing to think about is clearly efficiencies, but I don't believe that we can lead this community by just creating efficiency. We won't achieve our outcome.
Yep.
So I start to think, so what are the mitigations when you've got a small breaking base? What do you do? And it seems to me, this is where I'm thinking about the mitigations that we're taking, three that I would think of straight off the top of my head would be, how do we raise more money from our partners? We've said in here, for instance, that we almost sound like we've said something being fortunate. I think we might have been a bit more insightful, but we've been lucky. We've done well at PGF, for instance, or Shoalbury. So actually it says to me, so from a mitigation perspective, what are we doing to keep that supply going if it's available? What's the state of our relationships with the Crown? Because that's where it comes from. Can we tap this more? And I'd like to know that as a mitigation. Are we controlling that? Secondly, there is clearly the issue of how do we reduce our cost of delivery. Now, Three Waters is going to do that, arguably, by increasing what? The rating base. It's going to go across, well, we'll get the benefit of all in here, won't we, if we do it right. Who knows? So it starts to say, what do we do to reduce, what is the, well, we already have stuff in play, and I want to acknowledge that, but what can we do to reduce that cost delivery that potentially spreads the cost across a great number of people? What can we do by the way of collaboration? And secondly, we start talking about community wealth, because that is a restriction on us. Again, from a mitigation perspective, is there something we can be doing in the community development area of our organisations which helps the prospect of better wealth in the community? For instance, I know a council that ensures that everybody that leaves high school has a driver's licence. Now, it's indirect benefit, but it gives a prospect in a rural community that when kids come out, they can travel to work. Yep. So what I'm trying to work through here in my head is what are the mitigations that we really have in place to tackle what otherwise, Rachel, is a pretty big, hairy problem, which we haven't quite, it'll always be there, it'll be reddish, I think, and we need to tackle. And I'm just interested to know what the range of mitigations are that we have in place that we know are tackling this. Yeah.
Through you, the first thing, the comment that you made around working with our partners to gain more money like we did through PGF, I think we need to take a cautious approach with that. Council's heard me talk about the super yacht many times, and that still exists. Getting the capital money is one thing, but the operational flow-through from that's hitting the ratepayer is something else. And free money isn't always good money. So I think we have to be more critically aware of what impacts are going to come on the tail end of that money, and maybe lobby to have operational support come with the capital support. But I think that's where we're missing.
I think that's a good point, just looking at, I'm just raising high level mitigation.
I'm saying in terms of mitigation.
Because I accept that there are the things that follow. I guess I'm just trying to understand. Yeah. Informally speaking, but actually what are we doing about it? And I'm trying to work through in my head, what are the mitigations which can give me confidence as a risk governor here, that actually we've got processes in place to try and handle this, which takes it out of being red. Probably always get red, but
all good comment, and it's part of what the Councillor Smith stated before. what can we do in terms of out-of-box thinking, and the points you raised are good. If we can lift the average income of people, we can actually create affordability. Okay, no other questions on that one. So we go to now the NRC abatement notices. We note Councillor Stratton made comments. Any others? Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair Busich. Just a comment. I found the report interesting, especially because I felt that it painted a different picture than what is painted in the IAM's business report in terms of the risk there. When I read the IAM's business report, and I went through it just recently with Member Ward from the Bay of Islands Whangaroa Community Board, happy as, all fine and dandy through that, but this report paints a different picture. So I'd just like some clarity around why that might be.
Through you, Chair, but I don't know whether Tanya or Andy could make a comment on that one.
I believe, oh, sorry.
So through the Chair, we do have Louise online, who is our compliance officer, maybe Louise.
Okay. They can comment.
Louise, are you able to come in?
Good afternoon, Chair, councillors. I suspect the reason for the difference in tone is some of those abatement notices are historic. The business report looks at a snapshot in time, so a particular month, whereas the abatement notices might be over a much more extended period. What I can say is that almost all of the plants associated with those abatement notices have projects scheduled in the LTP for improvements. I'm not sure if that quite answers your questions. Is there anything else I can add?
No, I'm okay.
And yet the trend is increasing risk, right?
Yep.
I mean, if we take into account things that are being done as mitigations, then you would expect, even though they haven't come to pass, the risk would have been decreasing. So, I mean, it goes back to exactly the questions just being asked. I mean, this says our risk is increasing. So what do we do?
So through the Chair, if I can comment as well, I think it's worth noting that the government are imposing greater standards on water treatment and wastewater treatment, and of course with greater standards comes increasing risk of non-meeting standards. So the trend is probably upwards, but I think it's, as Louise has outlined, there is mitigation in the long-term plan. So it's really a part of there is increasing pressure around our compliance standards. We do have a response, and the two may not align fully in terms of timing at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'll ask Bruce this one, next one. There's the risk of winter coming. There's winter over the hill, and winter's here. And at what point, you know, if there's $1 million being put into the long-term plan to address a risk, but that doesn't come into account 3 years later, have we decreased the risk simply by putting the money in? And I would argue yes.
Minister, you're asking me.
Yeah, I am. Because this line has been, I think, been crossed several times today.
Yes.
Of you know the risk of something happening, the risk of winter coming versus winter. We can see winter coming and it's getting closer and closer. Versus it's now dead cold, right?
Yeah, look, I have to, as a member of the committee, reflect, John, that I was intrigued by the increasing status of this risk, because I had almost thought it would drop off, going in the other direction. And I wondered, in fact, I think the discussion we've just had isn't just about abatement notices. And this is what this is about, is that the risk is NRC abatements. Actually, our risk that we've just talked about is, can we deliver to future standards? Or something like that. It's something different to abatement notices. Now, the risk around abatement notices is NRC is changing their approach and they're using it more as a more regulatory lever rather than being, shall we say, educatable, facilitatable, whatever nice word we want to have in your mind.
Yeah.
So I actually wonder what is the real risk.
So
It's really what this asks would ask. Sorry,
I'm going to ask Glenn to respond, and Helen, I think, will respond as well.
Thank you, through the chair, actually. Member Bruce has said exactly what I was going to say, is that from an observation, maybe the risk needs renaming. You know, if the risk was around reducing our environmental impact, then we could show some positive moves and putting monies in the LTP could show that. But the risk title is around the reduction of the NRC abatement notices, which is very real every day until that stops with a regulator that has changed tack in the last 12 months in terms of the frequency that only uses tool to tell us we've done something wrong, we need to fix it. And previously that tool wasn't used as much.
Thank you. Helen?
Thank you. I'm pretty much following on from what Bruce and Glenn have been saying, but so Louise and I did actually consider changing that. We're looking at that trend and what should we put in it. We did, and that's what we did.
The commentary is in there about the risk trend may increase due to the legislative and regulatory change that we're currently facing. That's exactly what's going on. The NRC are more inclined to issue abatements at the moment for visibility with the changing regulatory environment, so that Taumata ROI is clear on what they're doing, rather than maybe having a discussion with us first and giving us an opportunity to respond. They're issuing an abatement notice first and then having the discussion.
Thank you, Helen. No other comments, Councillor Stratford?
Well, can I just say, I think therefore we need to the message is this, have we got this risk crafted right?
And that's what I was going to say.
Oh, okay,
and finish on that. Maybe this is something we need to look at, and given it impacts on the previous one we talked about, which is affordability, yes. But I'll hand that over to...
Oh, I was just going to add something that NRC abatements are expensive for the ratepayer.
Yeah.
So there is the environmental impact, but there's also, amongst that, compliance. They're not cheap.
And it's a step on the enforcement program. It's not actually just talking. It's the next step.
You're there for a while.
So through you, Chair, I'll be asking Jenny and Tanya to work with Glenn and Helen to ensure we can get this.
Thank you. Yeah, good discussion. So 9, customer service delivery. Just reminding people that just time-wise, if there's anything pressing, comment on that.
Can we take it off the list?
What?
Given that it's dropping down, yes.
I'm going back to Mike's point. This is need our focus. Previously in the workshop, this is need our focus.
Should come off the list.
Which is a good sign.
What should? What did I miss?
Customer service delivery is risk has been dropping, so it doesn't come off. That's the question. Well, we'll leave it with the
Chair, can I just ask a question first?
Yeah,
please. And my question applies to all of the reports, but it probably is most applicable to this one and the full process that Bruce has just raised. And that's the paragraph in here that says, where are the gaps and what more could we be doing? And I think from an assurance point of view, in an ideal world, that would say, what more are we doing? And that's not what it says. So anybody can write a list of things that they could be doing, but it doesn't give me assurance that it's going to continue that downward trend. So I'd just like some clarification as to why that paragraph is named what more could we be doing, as opposed to a more action statement in terms of the treatment conversations that we've had earlier today.
Chair, I think that refers to, I'll look to the experts in a moment, but I think that's aiming towards what does best practice look like, what does excellence look like, and there may be a debate about whether that's the right thing to do. I am conscious of a couple of things in the customer service delivery space, and we have got perhaps the best staff we have are sat next door in the contact centre. They're absolutely outstanding in what they do. I'm also conscious that we haven't yet given them the tools they deserve, a fully integrated CRM system, customer relationship management system, for example. I'm also cognizant in terms of customer service delivery that I think every single organisation in the country needs to look carefully at this in the light of COVID. What does it mean? Because it's a vastly dynamic and changing issue. It's a huge rock in the pond, as it were. Jamie, Tanya, could you shed any light on Councillor Smith's point about the use of that term?
I'm happy to do so. Thank you. Thank you. The gaps sorry, it is basically a gap analysis. So it's saying, identifying that these are opportunities that we're not yet working on, not in our program, or they're not active treatments. So we put that analysis in there. That came out of some work we did with Bruce Robertson at the start, when we looked at what would make a good risk progress report to this committee, and it was the identification of the gaps would really help the conversation. But I'm actually really happy to take advice on what you would like to see presented.
Yeah, we'll take that offline. Time. Any other comments on that item? I think we can look at the detail offline and go through the normal process there. So data governance risk. I have to admit, when I looked at this, I thought, hang on, last term we actually had a data governance committee, and now it's sort of split between subcommittee, now split between two committees, and now it's identified as a risk. It's a bit of a surprise, isn't it? Not? So any comments about my one there that people would like to?
Yeah.
Yep.
I was on a conference call the other night about information governance, data governance, and there's a whole lot of practitioners, and we got discussing the term data governance, which was really interesting. And I think it speaks back to my concern many months ago about the word governance and data governance, and it kind of implies that there's some level participation. Okay? And the conclusion the other night was that data governance is just this catch-all term, which may or may not have board level participation, depending on how it's used in the organisation, right? But one of the things that what did come about is that, and it was pointed out that Dame Diane Robertson, who's a thinker in this space, she believes there is a place for board level participation in data governance. In other words, there are parts of data governance that the board should be involved in. And I think I sent to you the report that she wrote in 2020, John, where she describes those things. And given that we've got a lack of formal data governance here as one of the risks, I wonder whether we should revisit that and identify what are the things that the board, the council, or data governance subcommittee should or could be involved in. I noticed that, I mean, with the CE delegations as they are, I guess there is no place, because there is a general delegation to the CE to do everything, unless it's prohibited in the Local Government Act, and data governance policy and data governance is not one of those things that are prohibited. So, we'd have to look at that and discuss that. On the issue of privacy policy, I noticed there, and it'll go back to, once again, the delegations, I noticed there's something called an internal policy adopted in August 2019. When I first saw this, I went back to all the agendas thinking that we may have had something to do that, we didn't. So once again, I couldn't even find it on the net. What is this privacy policy that we're talking about here? So that's another concern that we have these, especially something like privacy. Right around the world, privacy commissions are saying that this is a board level, part of this discussion, or part of this participation is at board level. You will all recall, maybe you won't, unless you were in that kind of area, you'll all recall the Ashley Madison debacle 4 years ago, where you had this crowd, this dating website for married couples, or married people, and they had this massive leak of all their stuff. And it was a real issue. And so the Canadian and the Australian Privacy Commissions got together and they wrote an entire report, and one of their major findings was that there was a lack of coherent governance. Okay, which is coherent governance is a top to bottom governance structure with policies and board participation. So I'll go back to my earlier statement. There needs to be some kind of board participation in both of these things, in privacy by itself and data governance.
Thank you. And Councillor Stratford after Councillor Smith.
I think in a roundabout way, Mike Edmonds kind of asked my question. We were on the same route. I think my question was one to the committee as to, on the back of that internal policy, and it's a question that's been in my mind. Going back to Bruce, you asked a dumb question earlier today, which set the tone, and it made me feel a bit more comfortable to answer a dumb question, so thank you for that. But my question is around what level of policy delegation is appropriate in the eyes of this committee. I think from an assurance and risk point of view, where do those levels sit? Because more often than not, we're seeing more and more internal policies that have no governance oversight whatsoever. So is that level of delegation appropriate in the eyes of the committee?
Smith, we're going to go to Councillor Stratford, and then I'm going to make a point of my own.
During the report last year, we had a briefing on the Privacy Act, and the legislation will have prompted the organisation to respond to the Privacy Act 2020, which is outside the realm of governance because they have to meet the legislation. So perhaps the committee needs to have a look at, there are some layers that have gone too far with an internal policy, but I don't think that there was. I'm really comfortable with the way the organisation's applying the Privacy Act.
Okay.
Who's phone?
Apologies.
No, not a problem. There's a $50 fine on the whiskey So, and it can go to Casey.
Everyone checked
This is the last meeting today. Just getting back up to business again.
Sorry, can I just respond to Kelly there from the legislation? I mean, that would be correct if our bottom line was mere legislation, okay, and that would be in the area of operations. But if we have any reason to go beyond the legislation, and that being a policy that the board decides, then that is something that the board gets to be involved with, and it's widely regarded that New Zealand is even with the 2020 update, New Zealand is behind Apple. They aren't in the same place as a lot of the rest of the world. And if the board decided that we should be closer or more private than the Privacy Act, then maybe we should be involved.
Yeah, so before we go to Will, who's dying to give a response, there's two issues on the table, so we're clear. There is the lack of formal data governance, which has been raised as a risk, and then there's the issue around privacy and policies in general, which is governance, oversight of policies and internal policies that have been written. Councillor Smith, you have on your committee data governance, as I do, and I'm wondering, with this committee, would they be happy to start, we look at, not today, but we look at addressing that and see what it looks like so that we can actually address this risk by looking at data governance, which has clearly probably causing some angst in terms of its definition, and working maybe as a joint committee, working on a subcommittee on data governance.
Chair Busich, I'm always keen to break down a silo, so absolutely. All
right, so that's, if we can make the
Certainly, Chair.
In terms of the policy, that again is something I think we need to look at, because I certainly believe that governance needs to have eyes in the trough and fingers out. I've heard that term being used, and I think it's a good one. And maybe there's something in here to bring in, because when I first read that myself, in fact I highlighted it, I thought adopted. When did we adopt that? And of course privacy is a crucial thing, and I'd be surprised if it's not on board level tables elsewhere. So you're looking at me, CE, did you want to respond? But Will, I say the points. Thank you.
if I could jump in and involve the Chief Executive on this one, that Sean and I have meet with the Information Commissioner and the Privacy Commissioner, and the issues that Councillor Stratford alludes to, that tension, that almost juxtaposition between both. They're both arguing almost from the opposite ends to bring a good outcome, but there is at best a creative tension in there. If I could touch on the point that Member Edmonds makes, it's great having Mike on here because he always prods us in the direction that I personally feel really positive, and I don't know if the chair passed on to you, but the bots idea, Mike, is definitely one that we're picking up. But coming back to the specific issue that you raised, I think that you're right that the data issue is perhaps missing. What we sought to do is to bring back to committee a technology update in every single agenda, and we didn't have that before. But I'm wondering, Jamie, if whether that could be retitled, reframed, and refocused to include data governance. Is that something that we could do, Jamie?
Through the chair, absolutely. So going back to Chairperson Even's initial comment, data governance, little d, is a term that we used in this report, and it actually was the subcommittee last triennium that actually gave us the intellectual framework on which this work has been progressed. And then in the way that we sought to provide this committee that your data governance of this risk issue is through both this reporting through here, and then in addition, the separate report every meeting on IT related issues, which is largely about security and data governance. And so we can certainly look to reframe and build that in stronger so that you have the assurance you need that you're looking at these matters at this level.
Thank you. So is the committee happy that the two chairs, so Councillor Smith and myself, work with staff to further some of those issues? Generally? I don't think it's to be a formal meeting, but I think we can let it happen. Happy? You're nodding?
You make it happen, Councillor Husich, I'll be there.
All right. Right, you don't need formal resolution now, but you are taking action, putting the action on it, so we've got some action on it. Thank you. So drinking water resilience. Sweet. No comments?
I did mine.
You had one before, yes, noted. And that brings us to program Darwin, risk. No comments on that one? We've been through that, I guess. Councillor Smith.
I think I'm just, it's great to see it on here. And I noticed that there's some good existing treatments that are a work in progress. What I am looking for from I didn't have entire assurance that the delivery of those treatments is matching the prioritisation that elected members feel is needed for this program of work. It is high priority in the views of council, and it needs to be delivered within timeframes that will ensure that our district puts its best foot forward through the reform process. So we know that 2024 will see a system shift towards a more centralised system, and Program Darwin is the key piece of the puzzle to make sure that that local voice is inputted into that centralised process. So I'm not feeling entirely comfortable at this point that this work stream, the priority of it is being recognised within the risk reporting that we see today.
Thank you. Councillor, Councillor Stratford and then Member Mike.
I just have to go into bat for infrastructure. There is a paper coming later this month. One of our council meetings that we've got, I don't know what the figure's going to be, but it's going to be big, isn't it, to help Project Darwin, the risks be mitigated. Yeah, so we don't know what that looks like yet. It's going to be good.
Yep. I just want to give elected members confidence that this is really high priority for us. It's super exciting. It's going to make us
amongst the best councils in terms of our asset management. It's ambitious and we didn't need to take this on at all. And I arrived in April 2017 and we didn't even have our risk appetites and our chartered top 12 risks sorted until November 18. It took a year and a half to get this body to that point. There's a lot of complexity in actually installing big pieces of architecture that don't exist. And he's going to bring to you, like to say, Councillor Kelly, and he's going to bring to you some fairly radical rescheduling and re-resourcing of what it actually takes to get Darwin. And some of that's because we have learned a lot in installing this completely new architecture in the first couple of years of attempting it. Good news is we've got the software in place, we've got a project manager in place, and now we've got a timeline. We're coming to you to talk about resources. This is going to happen, but it's really radical. And most councils, I'm not sure most councils, actually, a lot of councils, Bruce would probably have a better idea, manage their asset base like we used to with our asset managers, not how we're going to. All our major asset classes have got total through life mapping and costing. It's going to be quite incredible, but it's complicated, and I'm slightly embarrassed to say more complicated than I thought when I insisted that this got installed. We're in the best place we've ever been, but I'm really glad this is in glass case at ARF so you can keep an eye on us because we're all going to work quite hard to make this real, and you need to see every step of the way what we need to do.
Okay, thank you.
Member Mike.
Okay, so this, if you don't mind me asking, Bruce. So I just this conversation around the table, the conversation amongst all councillors, I would suggest our risk appetite for this is very, very low. The risk appetite, the idea of risk appetite is a fairly informal thing so far. So how do we communicate this? We don't have a risk appetite for this back into the organisation. So what is the framework for communicating this appetite to the?
Yeah, well, that's where it would help us to have, as I say, go back to a workshop, a proper workshop, and actually how do you define risk appetite? Because it tends to be something that you would relate back to, I guess, indicators of risk, and we haven't done that other than expressing a general concern. And I think if I picked up the tenor of the last 24 hours, this seems to be a project that's going on for a long time. So the appetite that clearly has been, say, breached, and I don't know if you can it hasn't been met, is timeliness.
Or communicated in a way.
Yeah, which could be the issue here. So, the follow through is, and I've heard Sean quite rightly, he said, look, we've got a radical change to deliver. So I think somewhere down the track, we'd like to hear what that plan is, because it's going to deal with, I think, the thrust of what I've heard over the last 24 hours has been the key, let's use the word liberally, the appetite risk that we are struggling with.
16th of December.
Yeah, and by communicate, I mean communicate from the board level to the CEO, right? If you were around in 2016, which you mentioned, Sean, I mean the appetite at that time was sky high. The appetite for the change was sky high. And we haven't talked about it much in the last 5 years, except that it's being undertaken. And I don't think we haven't been given the opportunity to discuss our risk appetite nor to communicate it to the organisation that it's still important that risk appetite is low. So, thank you.
Thank you. Can I just ask one question, John? Yes. Why is the risk in this increasing? Is it just merely the lapse of time, or what?
Because the resources that we estimated we need in time, money and people are all significantly greater than we thought. And we've been flipping rocks over trying to find out what we got wrong. But now we know what's going on. It's going to be put in front of you on the 16th, and we'll have some decisions to make from that to do those other recommendations. But it's not, it's not what we thought it was in terms of ease.
So if I would ask, so you've got a trend increase. Is that it has increased or it's still increasing?
I defer to
the chair. It's probably increasing until a point of a council decision on the 16th of December, and the risk profile will be reassessed for some.
It's going to come up again on the 16th. It's going to be interesting, that one. So I am going to push things along now. We've only got one other report attached, which is an observation of local government risk management practices, which I think is an excellent report worth reading. For those that are online, if they go online, read this report.
Excuse me, Chair, you could read that last report.
They're all part of it.
Ah, right.
Yeah. They're all part of the same thing. Yeah, right. So I'm now going to put it to the vote.
Yep.
And all in favour?
Aye.
Against carried. So move to item 6.3, our financial reports.
Sorry,
6.2. 6.2, I ticked, obviously we're going a bit slow. So 6.2, which I've already ticked off, which is 112 and on the right page. Do I have a move and a second?
I've got Jill with this, Chair.
Yes, I'll move that, John.
Thank you. Seconder? Second. So we've got Jill here. Jill, do you want to add comments to it? We're taking it as read, but Jill, do you want to add anything to this that we need to note? Otherwise, I'll go to a members table.
Jill's online, Chair.
No, it's online. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong place. And you're bright as anything up the top there.
Nothing to add, other than I think the note at the bottom of how 3 out of 4 of our people put down that we would definitely be an employer of choice. I think we should see that as a huge success currently.
Yeah. And I have questions around the table. Councillor Stratford.
Yep, I acknowledge the positive feedback. It's awesome. But have we responded to the feedback from levers, I'll put levers, around the issue of internal communications?
Yes, we have. Yeah, and we specifically know what that person was talking about.
Okay, awesome. Cool, thank you.
Other comments? Right, I'll put it to the vote. Oh, Councillor Smith, you're just quick enough.
Thank you. Thank you for this report, Jill. Just on page 115, the graph, what do you like least and most about working at FNDC? I just saw there was a trend around career progression no, just career progression. Just looking for some assurance that that feedback is being used proactively.
Yep, so we used to do our succession and development planning yearly. We are now doing it on a 6-monthly basis, so that we are talking to our leaders and our people about what are their aspirations and what are the development plans. So definitely we're really, in actual fact, some of our vacancies now are because of internal progression.
It is a problem of a relatively small organisation which is going to have large trade pyramids, like you imagine in Auckland City Council, how you can progress through hundreds of people who are peers, specialist peers, and dealing with them in a smaller lot. It's something you can't do much about.
Staff turnover seems to be about right. I mean, anywhere between, I guess, 10 and 30% seems to be okay. But I'm interested to know what that means in district services. You've got one turnover 7. What is that, the percentage of that department that would indicate that's quite a concern?
Yeah, concerning through you, Mr. Chair, turnover is driven by market forces. We're seeing people leave for more money, simple as that. And in the consenting areas, we have throughout New Zealand a lack of planners, and building consent staff also in high demand.
So what does that cost us? What does it cost the council to replace someone? And I mean, put it in percentages of salary, or however you want to do it. Is it an expensive business? Is it an expensive business to have high staff turnover in that department?
It is. Retraining and training people through entry level through to senior level of consenting does take time and does take money. So it is an expensive process. This isn't unique though. We've seen turnover over the last few years. The market is very attractive at the moment for consenting staff, more so than it perhaps had been in the past. But we've had turnover before, and it's an ongoing problem, not only for us, but throughout the country. Retraining our building officers, retraining our planners, because inevitably there's movement. But this last quarter has seen significant numbers And it is a concern to us, it's a risk, because if we lose more, we will run the risk of not achieving our statutory time frames. We're doing well in building consents. We're starting to see the effect of high volumes of consents, resource consents, and also obviously the impact of stuff. But we are using consultant planners. That in itself is a challenge because that doesn't answer the question. It doesn't take away the risk because we can't allocate all of our consents internally and or externally for the sheer lack of availability of planners to do the work.
Okay, so I'm glad you reframed it in a sort of like a risk language there, because it's not so much in the report. So if we're talking about risk mitigation or risk treatment, and I guess the assessment order would be, what are the risks, so to speak? You've got, like you say, you've got the risks of not being able to perform versus the risks of not having enough people, which is not the same thing, because you just pointed out you can go to contract planners. So have you thought about what the treatments are and the cost of those treatments versus the cost of?
We are discussing with the people and capability team, and Jill can confirm that there's a program underway of looking at the retention strategy, how we can hold on to our people. The promotion from within policy is one way of doing that, of holding on to good people. So the variety of aspects that we are looking at in the mitigation areas to hold on to good people, to promote them from within, provide extra development opportunities for them, not only for their technical roles, but beyond that, so we prepare them for other roles in the organisation, in leadership roles, etc. So there are a number of things happening in the mitigation space to deal with the issue.
So thank you. So just Dr. Dean, is there some work to be done by the risk team in potentially emerging risks or not? I know you've done quite well in the past and probably
we have.
But don't worry about it. Just put it.
There is the short answer is yes. We've worked with Tanya. Retention of staff and turnover has been on our risk register. It just hasn't escalated. It doesn't feature on.
Just making a note. So I'm not going to try and solve that.
Jill's also got her hand raised. Sorry.
Jill, you got a hand raised to add any other last comment?
Yes, I hear what you're saying, but actually when you look at the factors why people are leaving, it's not all because of that. People are they're relocating, they're going to study, they've got family commitments. So those type of reasons we cannot do anything about that. That's going to happen naturally.
Yeah, there are different ways to think, like cadetship and various other mitigations that might be looked at. But anyway, that's off the subject now, so I'm getting back on the subject. So we've gone through that. I'm going to put that to the vote.
Just have one question around that. If this, that department, if somebody was leaving from that department, would they be able to relocate and still work for us though? They would, wouldn't they?
I think we would, it would depend on the role. But yes, certainly we have had people that have relocated to Whangarei and they still work for us. So but it does depend on the role and whether it can be done remotely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jill.
Building inspectors, for example, Mr. Chair, have to be present.
Yeah, thank you.
Not at a distance.
Right, calling the debate finished. Put it to vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you. Item 6.3 at last, and that's on page 117. Do I move it second, please? The Assurance Risk and Finance Committee received the report.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Second, I'll second it, John. Now, I'd expect some comments on this. Janice, do you want to put the note saying you're happy, taking it as read? Members, everything is clear? The big variations are all clear?
Ish.
Clearish. Maybe Janice, you can give explain explanation to ish.
Depends what the question is, Chair.
There are some big variations in there. I think I asked you that before, and you did give. So maybe for the benefit of everybody, let's give you a Situation there.
Through you, Chair, in terms of income, we've got big variations because of the grants that are transferred from last year to this year. So that's why some of those numbers are looking quite big. In the capital space, we've got some high commitments showing against lower budgets, and that's because the carry forwards haven't been approved for the time this report was prepared. And we have had some additional budgets go through for the Sweetwater project, so that's what's flicking out a quite big variance in the water space when we get to the capital report.
Thanks, Jim. That's great. Any comments? Bruce? Concerns? Good. Putting to the vote, all in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. So item 6.4.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 137. Second. Thank you, Councillor Stratford. Comments? Any thoughts or questions? Or?
One or two, John, if that's okay. I was, as always do, these tend to focus on the red web. When I was looking, for instance, at transport rating and the average quality of ride, etc., I take it these are measured at certain, I've got actually, I got my answer, they are measured at the end of the financial year, so we'll only find out how we're going on that at the end of the financial year. Sorry, so it's not a question, it's just I've read my papers properly, sorry.
Okay. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair, if you search my question is, from a principal point of view, how as an organisation are we using this as a learning document? When I go through this, I see quite a bit of poor contract performance, for example, and I'm not confident that we're using that to inform our contract delivery going forward when we're having discussions around this table about that. That information is not necessarily brought to the table when we are debating that. So I'm just looking for some assurance that this document is used as a learning document through the organisation to ensure that we are meeting, improving capital investment, for example, and annual playing times to make sure that we're meeting those levels of service.
Yeah, good question. Andy, you want to respond to that?
Through the Chair, we do pick these up and we do report them back through to our contracts. So these are probably the contract managers, especially with the contract providers.
Doesn't give me entire assurance when we can see consistent poor performance. I think if it was one-off poor performance, then I would be happy to accept that. But when there seems to be trends of quite a significant miss of that KPI, I've got some concerns there. Which ones?
Through you, Chair, is there a link? I think what Councillor Smith is saying here, if I picked her up, is there a link between consistent reds and that feedback to the contractor? I think that's the point there, Andy, that Councillor Smith is making.
And then how is that used in a proactive manner to ensure that it's picked up at procurement and contract? Yep, the response to wastewater, for example, is a good one.
What page?
Sorry, just clicking back through. Yeah, 147. 147.
7.
Sewage overflows resulting from a blockage or other fault. So the KPI is more than 95% responded in under 2 hours.
These are the response times, not
Clean.
I've got Glenn's got his
Steve,
Through the Chair, to answer your question, a very simple question is yes, we do take this into consideration and we do have discussions with our contractors. What you're seeing in front of you tells part of the story. So I think that's important, but so what I'd like to do is answer it 2 ways, by explaining the part of the story, but to then give you some assurance that we understand, we have our hands wrapped around this. So first of all, the KPI that's shown in here are KPIs that are set by DIA and are relevant across all water and wastewater operators through the country. We've got some unique factors up here, and it sounds like I'm about to give you an excuse, but it's not, it's an explanation. We've got some unique factors up here, which mean that because of our huge geographical distance, to actually get on site and respond in less than 2 hours sometimes is impractical. So we failed. I happen to be hoping you would ask the question around this. Actually, Bridget,
It's what I prepared earlier. The one that I could read better than this one.
Cheers, just a bit of a double mic. Is this question you set up in the back?
It was not.
it wasn't, but I just knew that once you saw it, you would ask.
He does
I
seem
think
to
I have
think
one
like a governor.
So what I'm hopefully going to show you there is twofold, is that, so actually seeing the result on the report, it looks bad, that's what's highlighted in red, but perhaps if we drill down a little bit more, you can get some comfort. So at the top, what we're talking about, you can see there, you've got July, August, September, October, so the number of service calls we've had throughout the district. And you can see I've broken it down to actually show the number. So we've got over that 4-month period, there were 44 of them. There were 7 in July as an example. And 6 of them related to our gravity pipe system and 1 related to our pump stations. And of that 6 as an example, you can see that they were, whether it was a blockage or whether it was a break in the line, or pump related. And what's quite important, I'm sure you want to know, is so we've had a spill about how much ended up into the environment. And so you can see I've got programs that show if it entered the waterway, no, or entered the waterway, yes. So during July, unfortunately, we had 50% of our gravity system overflows that ended up in the waterways there. 2 as a result of a blockage, 1 as a break. What I've got another information we break down, we can see, and actually in all those situations it was following heavy rain. I've shown that, showing some of the areas where they occurred. You can see some of the districts, but I really wanted to draw your attention to the map actually, where I've sort of graphically shown you where all that still took place. The only 2 that's missing off this is the 2 that have been Russell. But you can show how graphically spread they are when our alliance partner has an office in Kaikoura and an office in Kaitaia, and when some of those spills are right out in the Karankaria Peninsula, to get on the site within 2 hours is impossible at times. And of course, what's not shown here, it could be the middle of the night, so they've been called from home. So there's lots of extreme circumstances, but what I'm really trying to say is that we analyse this data every month. We have discussions with our contractors, and if I need to pull out the client stack, the way that about to do, we use it to help drive some of our asset management discussions that take place, our capital programs. So for instance, one of the projects that is very live is around the sewer replacement type programs that works to overflows up quite high. And you can see in this report, just in those 4 months, the amount that happened in the TR period. So we work with that information. So what you're seeing in that report is just one part of that picture. That doesn't reflect perhaps the work that goes into wrapping our heads around.
So I guess, I think what I heard is that our centralised performance, our centrally set performance indicators are not fit for purpose for local solutions.
Some of them are not, you're absolutely right. And we could therefore define our own. But we've taken the view that for simplicity, let's just stick with what is across the country and understand the differences, like I'm hopefully trying to explain today.
I think what I was also wanting to highlight was strategically we're gearing our contractors up for reputational failure. If their performance that is measured within this report, because the performance indicators are not fit for purpose, is continuously showing us poorly. And when we talk about reputational risk to the organisation, that's perhaps an area that we could improve through advocacy, although I'm sure Three Waters situation is going to solve all of those magical problems for us.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure about that. Thank you. Andy, you wanted to make a point?
Yes, it's through the chair. I echo clearly and it is a good debate to have a risk and finance meeting, because if you felt as elected members that performance needed addressing, and that to people's comments around risk appetite, and to absorb that risk, you can of course invest for better service, but that would have a direct impact on that. So it is a valid discussion to have, and clearly, but just off the top of my head, you could establish another depot for finance orders in the Hokianga, for example, so you'd have one in each area. That would come at a significant increased cost, but you as elected members may decide that that cost is worth it in terms of reputational risk or any other risk you wish to address.
I think it's a pretty big, so it's not only the risk of non-performance we're looking at here, there's this level of service that we want to do across the whole Far North. And when Three Waters come, they'll be running out of Auckland, so I'll be quite impressed to see how they actually achieve everything, but that's another matter. It does come down to our level of service. But
so John, let's ask one of our questions. So do we actually have, what is the level of service that we see with our contractors? Because clearly it can't be this far back. So what is the level of service we find?
No, we do have contractors. That's why we have all those conversations with them. Absolutely. So one of those.
Somewhere we must accept that actually they can't leave. Or are we actually saying these are the real? I mean, I appreciate the department is centrally set, but really it goes back to Roche's point, we're setting them up to fail on.
Yeah, in some cases they are, you're absolutely right. But we didn't want to set a different standard with our contractor less than what we were nationally reporting against. So we hold them to account on it, but we're not unreasonable. So, and for instance, one of those overflows that did go to the environment, unfortunately, that was beyond the 2 hours. When it first got reported in, it got reported through as a storm issue, not as a sewer issue, and with the heavy rain that was happening, the choice was made by our contractor to actually go to a known wastewater overflow. It happened that actually this was storm and it was wastewater, and it was of a high priority, that if they had known that up front, they would have gone in. So those sort of things. It was this. Yeah. Yes.
And I think, Mr. Chair, this highlights when we do have contracts come to the governance level, it's being raised continuously, the performance is not reported back to ensure that that's part of our decision making, and consequently we're also not looking at how we address that level of service. So we're shooting ourselves in the local foot by accepting a centralised solution that we know is not fit for purpose, but also not responding to that, and I think that's a separate conversation in itself.
Right. I think we've given this a good debate, so now there's some work to do there to pull things up. I'll put now to the vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Yes, carried. So we go now to item.
Never mind if we have other points.
You want to go to item 6.5, and that is elected members' expenditure. Do I remove and a second?
Yes.
And that is on page 162. Take a quick break after this one. We'll come to stop.
I'll move.
Move, seconder. Thank you, Bruce. Comment?
I haven't been to my water conference yet. Hopefully I get there next year, and then I'll do a report.
I've got a whole lot of outstanding travel thing which will be going on maybe next time around, which I can think of. Member Mike.
I have a few questions if you don't mind before I make a statement. So what risk is being addressed here, given that we're in the risk?
The risk is that have been a public sector entity, and these matters being something of, well, they're sensitive for the reason that actually we are using ratepayer money for activity which might be seen as suspicious. So, for instance, Kelly going to the water conference or planning to go to the water conference His head has always been seen by the Director General as being sensitive in nature. And so the test that we're doing here is that this spend meets what we would define as being reasonable and meeting some sense of business case test.
Okay, so given that anybody who goes on a conference here probably goes through 3 levels of scrutiny, what is the residual risk?
The residual risk is a final overview check. Well, sorry.
Yeah, no,
it is probably low.
Yep.
Okay, which I mean, your point's well made, but it's a chance. It's actually probably the number right at the bottom, 5,430. If it was 25,430, we might think differently. And they could all be validly approved through a 3-layered system.
Okay. So my next question, I've got 2 more. Why is this, given this is personal information, you know, under the definition given in the Privacy Act, this is definitely personal information. Why are we disclosing it, or why is this in the public part of the meeting?
I push back on that because the Audit New Zealand says it's best practice for this information to be reported to the public.
Which I agree with Councillor Stratford. I think that's great. You want to get to...
It's about accountability
I will
to the public.
Do you think the Privacy Commission would agree with that? And that's an email that I sent to the governance this morning for maybe the Privacy Office going after that?
We can help you with that.
Maybe you guys can take it.
Sean might have more to say, but this is part of that juxtaposition that we talked about before, that tension between, on the one hand, wishing to be transparent, addressing issues that Bruce raises, but on the other hand, protecting privacy. And there's a balance of it and a choice to be made. Jamie?
Through you, Chair, I actually do have the answer to this. So when I was the public officer, I was involved in initiating this. So this came out of both the audit need, but also the fact that we were getting legitimate requests for this information, and the Ombudsman made a determination that this was public information and that we had to release it. So we made the choice with you at the time, last triennium, to be fair, to make this explicit and upfront now because there was nothing to see, pretty much.
Thank you.
Okay, no, that's a good answer. Thanks. Look, I went online after it said, the part that says best practice, I went online to see if I could find this. And the first thing I found, strangely enough, was a statement by the Auditor General that there's no such thing as best practice in risk management, it's whatever you can do. So I dug a bit deeper and tried to find about sensitive expenditure. And the only thing I could find for public bodies that they were concerned about was sensitive expenditure of staff and non-elected members. And if you think about it, that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, you know, if the elected members have to go through 3 levels of scrutiny to go somewhere, then that's a pretty low risk. But if you know, then effectively the staff as a collective, you know, effectively approve their own sensitive expenditure. So this is a confusion. So the Auditor General, Audit New Zealand, I think they're very similar thing, is saying, you know, the only thing I could on the site was staff sensitive expenditure. And so I've got to ask the question, if we're overseeing the sensitive expenditure of elected members, why aren't we also overseeing the sensitive expenditure of the high level management of the organisation?
Councillor.
Sorry, Ms. Matty as well.
Oh, Matty, do you want to make a comment? Matty, if you can make a comment, I think I've got one from Councillor Stratford as well. So, Councillor Radich.
No, not really, John. I don't know where the hell Mike's coming from. But anyway, I just want to. I thought we councillors paid for our own jackets. Do we pay for our own jackets, council jackets, or they're just given to us and the ratepayer pays for it?
I'll let the CEO answer that one, Matty.
Okay.
Would you mind, just while I check that, would you mind taking councillors.
Councillor Chapman.
Oh, yeah, well, Sean's finding a response to that. Mike, so the only staff member that council, manages is the CEO, and sensitive expenditure is monitored by council, or the CE review committee. And then the CE, I'm sure, I have comfort that Jill and the CE office, whoever, manage sensitive expenditure within the
Okay, so what you're saying is somewhere in the organisation, sensitive expenditure is looked after.
Yes.
Cool, that's all I need to know,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, member Mike.
Yes, the jackets.
Have you got an answer from me?
Yeah, look, it's an unusual policy because generally workers like to be distinguished when we like our workers to be distinguished by the uniform, but we made an exception because the jacket actually looks pretty good on the councillors when they're doing work, so we made the jackets available to elected members. Some have taken them up, and they do represent a cost to the public for those items, and so in the best spirit of this transparency, we also put the value of those jackets on this sensitive expenditure table.
Is there any best practice on the Auditor General site about this? I mean, it's clearly stated there's best practice here, so there must be something that we can come to.
There's a policy at national level called government sensitive expenditure. I'm looking into the CFO because she may remember exactly what the reference is called, but this is an issue that all Crown and local government agencies are very sensitive to. Because if you're going to go and spend money on a business dinner, in particular, is sensitive, or anything that could be of benefit to staff at the expense, or executives or elected members at the expense of the public, then it should be fully transparent and challengeable. So that document, I'm picturing it now, but I don't have one with me, is something that we all treat as the sort of Bible, if you like, and it prescribes the best practice which we're following.
So, member Mike, I've got captured here some action. We'll come back to you with some information. Yep. So I'm going to put it now to vote. All in favour? Aye. Okay. Right, now we're going to have a short, we've actually got one more serious item, which has got to be short, and we can get them over very quickly and take a break before.
No, you have to 3:30.
Oh.
So we
You can go through public and then group.
Yeah.
Do you still have a quorum without me?
Yeah, you have a bit of a break. So I'll move now to item 6.6, page 164. Can I move in a second? I'll move it. Second. So this one here.
So you Chair, could I introduce Susie McCall? This is Susie's first meeting of the ARF committee. Maybe some members haven't met Susie.
Hopefully we move a bit quicker, a bit slow today, but Susie, you want to comment on anything here? We'll take it as being read. I've got yellow marks all over it, but
I'd just like to present the report. It's an update on the first 6 months and acknowledge that the work that Chair Research did in 2020 to look at sustainable outcomes that we can implement throughout the council. So sustainable procurement is an excellent lever to deliver some broader outcomes, and this report reflects the first 6 months of the work through the council. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah. Any questions, members? Councillor Smith?
At the risk of prolonging things, it's simply just a request. Is there any opportunity that we could report? It's great to see the youth 15 to 24. With my Mayor's Task Force for Jobs hat on, I'd love to see the NEET rate reported on if possible. I don't know if this is the right place to be raising that, but I wanted to. So thank you.
That is something that we'd like to do in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Susie.
Thank you. And I do, but for the sake of time, I've got a few things I've verbally raised, but I wouldn't mind catching up with you on it. And that is the connection with wellbeing. So you've got social, economic, cultural and environment outcomes with the connection to the communities of interest and the community plans. I'd like to see a correlation there. but I'll talk to you and Sean, because he's looking at me with a question mark, which I have spoken to him about before, and that would mean there's no, I'm not distracting from reporting what's been done at all. Okay, so another comment, so I'll put it to vote, all in favour? Aye. Yes, carried. We're coming to, we have to move this, even though it's nil at the moment, but we have identified a number of, put a number of tasks on the action sheet.
Happy to move, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and seconded, thank you, and I'll put it to the vote. All in favour?
Aye.
Yes, carried. Thank you. That brings us to the end of the public, so I'll move, if I have a seconder, that we go into public excluded for the reasons given.
Yep.
As you'll see there. Thank you, Mr. Chapter. And so we will actually have a 5-minute break. Thank you.
Can we remind Councillor Radish to mute his microphone, please?
again, and I think Councillor Stratford, who's getting tired, is going to close with the again. And let me know when. Well, thank you, everybody. Just before we close with Kaukia, Councillor Stratford, I'd just like to thank this lady sitting to my right, which is Casey Ennan, who's been with us and doing a great role, and moving on to help with the transition with into the new training and the work that's going to be done there, including the training and everything goes with it. So thank you very much, Casey. Here is the gift. So thank you very much. And yeah, and you're not leaving us, so we look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you very much.
And that's it. And thank you, everybody. This is our last committee meeting for the year. And be safe. Look after yourself over the Christmas break. Thank you.
Chair. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki o ihu karaiti me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu, ake, 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 ake.
Right, thank you.